So I love coming to these meetings. There's just a ton of great presentations happen. I learn all kinds of really useful and interesting things. So I've talked to some friends on and off about some frustrations I have with the way we communicate online. And I thought I'd turn them into a completely impractical and useless presentation, but one that hopefully will make you think about the internet a little bit, maybe in some ways you haven't before. Fairly quick, so if you don't find it useful or interesting, it'll be over soon. But I hope I've made something where I can make you think. So here are most of the ways I communicate with other people that isn't face-to-face. Right? It's years since I've written anyone a letter, so this is pretty much it. And this is the world that we've sort of developed on the internet, and there are legacy sort of means of communicating. And I've kind of broken up using the web into sort of static web pages and then various kinds of web-based applications that we use to communicate in different ways. And, you know, this has just sort of grown like Topsy, and people come up with new ways of communicating. They've implemented, you know, new protocols and new applications. And what I want to say is that I think it's time we rethought this mess. You know, when I want to communicate in different ways with different people, I have to use a different application and a different protocol and possibly even a different device. And if you just apply some basic engineering principles to this, this is stupid. That's kind of what I'm here to say. So I use all these things. I don't use Twitter because I don't get Twitter. But okay. No, I understand it. I just don't know why people want to use it. But anyway, so one of the ways in which all these, it seems to me, the major ways that these different sort of channels differ is in the immediacy, right? There are things where if someone generates a message on this channel, I get interrupted. And then there are things that don't, where I've got to request the thing that I want to receive. You might also refer to this as sort of intrusiveness. Then we have the kind of the formality of the message, right? So if you're sending Twitter is kind of the ultimate informal communication medium, right? But, you know, instant messages is kind of in the same boat, and these other kind of things where you expect people to usually put more effort into it, and they've got, you know, I think what really defines them in terms of the kind of the protocols and the media is that actually the protocols in the media actually enforce that by giving you the ability to format what you're doing or not. So by not giving you the ability to format your message in any kind of interesting ways, I have less commitment when I subscribe to someone's tweet that I'm going to get all this stuff. Right? So by putting the constraints on the sender, this lets me, the receiver, control my world. But I've got to control my world by choosing the protocol and the application. I'm in all these little ghettos, right? Another thing that's really important is privacy, right? So there are things where I'm sort of sending it to the whole world, and there are other things where I'm sending them to individual people or small groups. Then there's kinds of transients, right? It's things that are for the here and now, that are quick, ad hoc, and there are other things where you put them up there and you expect them to sort of linger for longer and people to be able to make use of them in 6 months or a year from now, and they're still meaningful. And then there's actual what the content of the message itself looks like, right? Whether it's video or text or structured message. Those are kinds of all the major classes I can think of there. So what we can do, I think, is we can take all that big mess of applications that we use and different ways that we use to communicate with other people electronically, and we can say, well, they're all defined in some sense by the immediacy, formality, privacy, transients, some other stuff and the medium. The other stuff might include, in particular, authentication and authorization. And again, everybody's had to do their own. So you've got a Twitter account, an email account, and a account on 17 different blogs. And then another thing that's important, it defines all these different media, is how they handle and what ability they give you to refer to other media. So instant messaging is a series of short messages, but implicitly they all refer to the ones that came before them, right? Email gives you a different way to refer to other email messages. You know, this is a response to that one, and they can actually form a tree. And that's actually part of the protocol. I don't think some people realize that. Something else that's important that I didn't put on here is the device. Right, so SMS you have to do on a phone. There's different assumptions about the devices you're using and what they're going to let you do. So if we take a medium that's text, that's immediate, informal, public, and transient, we get Twitter, right? If I take immediate, informal, private, transient voice, I get telephone, right? Same thing, but with video, TV, perhaps you could define that way. What if I had an informal kind of version of TV? Well, you might have something you might call a voip. Why don't we have that? I have a video camera built into this. I have a video camera built into my phone. If I had something like Twitter, but it sent like 5-second videos to people that I could just bang off.
12 seconds TV.
Okay, so someone's had the idea, but again, they've had to invent a different application and a different protocol, right? So we're all stuck in these ghettos. We're innovating by reproducing all this infrastructure for validation and a new user interface that's going to borrow an awful lot of stuff from somebody else's user interface, but you've got to do it all again. It's crazy. Right? I'm sorry? Well, yes. Immediate private transit instruction message is an API call, right? What about deferred, informal, public, permanent, and whatever, and this is a response to something? Well, that's a comment on a blog or something like that, right? You can build a whole business model on, well, let's take that, and let's make it immediate, not deferred. By deferred, I mean, you know, you've got to go back and ask for it, right? I don't remember if it's Discuss or Intense Debate or one of the others, but they actually have commenting on blogs being more like a chat. So as other people post, it comes up right on your screen while you're on the page. And there's a whole business model. It's just like taking this idea and changing one of those parameters. They do a lot of other stuff too, but less. So what I'm saying is, can't we decouple all this stuff? Isn't that basic computer science engineering stuff? It's like, can't we have the ability to define my own channels with my own properties? Can't we construct like take HTTP and some, you know, headers and a streaming protocol, and let me choose up what my channel ought to look like for whatever purpose I have, and bang, I can invent voips in 5 minutes. Can't we have an infrastructure that we can all draw on that does all that stuff? So let's assume we did. How might I use it? Well, I could define a new channel for my boss to use. So I have a daytime filter. So during the day, you can send me anything, and it comes up and interrupts me right away. But in the evening, you can only send me text, and I've got to go and look at it. Right? Or what about structured messages? If structured messages are all that some people can send me. So retailers that I have orders in with can't send me spam. They can't send me junk mail I didn't ask for. Perhaps all they can send me is messages like this that have a few number fields and like maybe a 50-character comment if they need to tell me something, right? Wouldn't that be cool? I think there's a lot to be said for actually the idea that people should be able to have APIs, and we ought to be able to invent our own APIs on an ad hoc basis and only allow people to communicate with us in constrained ways. That would, I think, go a long way to solving the spam problem. What about, I have this idea that I'd like to put some video cameras around my house so when I'm out I can see what the wife and kids are up to and watch them in the backyard. So maybe I can create a channel using this imaginary infrastructure where I can pull up my video anytime I want to, and if the alarm system goes off at home, it can interrupt me with a message telling me where the alarm went off and what video of what's going on in the house. If I can filter by devices, then I can say, well, my boss can call me on my phone or my cell phone or send me a message on my computer during the day, but all he can do is send me a message on my computer in the evening and on the weekends. I've talked about how I think if you rethink what we're doing with all these applications, we need maybe some simplified, unified back-end infrastructure. What about user interface? This is some ideas I've been mulling for a couple of years, and this is very, very fast. I could talk about this for hours if you like. I've also been thinking about user interface, but Google stole my thunder with Google Wave. I don't know, you've probably all gone and looked at all this, and I think if you imagine a world where we sort of blur all the boundaries between these different protocols and filtering and da-da-da, you wind up with something with user interfaces that are a lot like what they're doing with Google Wave. I haven't looked at their protocols. I think they're going with a sort of a monolithic protocol, and I think what we want is something where we can pick and choose pieces of this stuff, not take the whole enchilada if we don't want it. But what they're doing with the user interface is they've got sort of instant messaging parts in the user interface, and they've got sort of an inbox with filtering, so they've sort of glommed together all these different user interfaces. I don't know how much time you spent looking at this, but it's going to be marvelous, I think, when we can do that. But what I'm saying is, as developers, wouldn't it be great if we had kind of an equivalent of this on the back end, and we had a world where we could invent voips in 5 minutes because we didn't have to replicate all that infrastructure yet again. Anyway, that was it. Hope I give you something to think about. Any questions?
Okay, there we go. So a lot of companies like take the individual API theory and kind of apply it to aggregation, like try to aggregate everything, and then you can, from there, you can define your own way of looking at what is aggregated. But people often get inundated because they don't understand how to properly filter once everything's aggregated, and it becomes a completely overwhelming experience. Like, that's why friend feed has a tough time catching on, because people put everything in there and then they can't follow anything because it's just, you know, a tidal wave of information. So how do you reckon people, how would you try to bring that to the masses without them falling for the classic pitfall of becoming completely overwhelmed?
Yeah, and I've got sort of my RSS feeds at the max now. I don't know about the rest of you. I get like 1,000, 2,000. Yeah. It's, I think the biggest unsolved problem with communication online is privacy and authentication, the ability to control who can communicate with you, how and when, why, and in what fashion. And that's why we use all these different applications, right? I have some people I know carry 2 cell phones, like there's the work cell phone, and that's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. And I see Google Voice, it looks like, is going to be able to change that. You'll be able to have a Google Voice number and it turns off during the day and so on. So I think that's the biggest one. I'm not here to say I know how to solve all of these problems, but I am here to say that what we have now is a shocking, disastrous mess, and there are obvious things we could do to improve on it. And I think there's a lot of opportunities for people to improve on it. You know, I think there ought to be open source projects to develop this kind of abstracted infrastructure where you can, you know, define channels with different properties. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't argue with your vision or the idea that we should have open infrastructures, but I would just, this isn't a question. I'm just positing, like, I think perhaps the reason why we have all these different communication channels is because they each serve a very particular nuanced need in our lives. Like, and I just think about like personal spaces. Like I have work and I have my home. Like I hang out with certain friends, talk about certain things, and because I'm also fascinated by this problem, and I'm very aware of it because I have a blog. I'm active on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I just started a Tumblr thing, you know. And I mean, like, I've known about that thing forever. Like, I've known about Tumblr. Like, I've known about all these different things. You know, now I'm sharing stuff with people on Google Reader all the time. But when I step back and look at it, in each place I'm talking to totally different audiences about totally different things. And that happens in real life, and I don't think there's any reason it shouldn't happen online. So I think that's kind of, you know, hearing you go through this, I'm thinking, okay, it makes sense to me that we have all these different, if you want to call them ghettos, that's fine. But I think it makes sense. We'll say they're balkanized, all these different areas where we communicate with different people. As far as the technology behind them being proprietary or, you know, some weird proprietary, whatever, like the platforms. And if that's a problem or not, I don't know. I mean, sure, it is. I mean, that is how we get paid, though.
Well, I mean, what that does is that couples a bunch of things together, and you use friend feed, or I don't know, I don't use friend feed, but you use that, and you have a collection of people you've defined on that, and you use that because it has certain properties. Now, that collection of people could probably be reused elsewhere if you had the properties and the people separated, right? You see where I'm going with that? It's crazy. You ought to be able to send an instant message to all those people or something on an ad hoc basis, even if friend feed doesn't support it, right?
Right. Yeah, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying, but I also see how, I mean, interfaces, certain interfaces tend to appeal to different people, you know?
Well, but yeah, so let's have
the different crowds.
Have
So
the
are you talking about
protocols and the
data
user
portability?
interfaces be separate, and let's be able to innovate on those. And if someone comes up with something like Google Wave that gives you a better way of doing chat, then let's leverage that in everywhere you have any chat-like communication.
Okay.
Right?
There's nothing wrong with that.
Well, thank you for your time.